Hi, you're listening to It Happened to Me, a rare disease and medical challenges podcast. The mission of our podcast is to support you, our listeners, and to create community as you confront the toughest challenges in life. All of us will experience health hardships. The real question is how we adapt. That's the focus of It Happened to Me, which wants to help you overcome limitations and live a full and satisfying life. Drawing on their own health challenges, co-hosts Kathy Gildenhorn and Beth Glassman interview guests who share stories and research to help you succeed in the face of difficult health obstacles. It happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.
Joining us today is Amy Raskin, whose son has both celiac and type 1 diabetes. We are going to learn about both of these conditions on the show today and focus on what Amy has learned being a parent to a child with these conditions.
Amy is also a visionary in global thematic investing and the chief investment advisor at Chevy Chase Trust. Since 2014, Amy has led the firm to excel in thematic investing. Under her leadership, Chevy Chase Trust has consistently outperformed its global benchmark. Amy is a regular guest on CNBC. Amy also serves on the boards of the University of Pennsylvania's Engineering School and the T1D Fund. To our audience, I must disclose that Amy is a good friend, and I completely admire and respect how she balances her family life, including both her sons, their needs, and a very demanding professional career. Welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for being a guest on It Happened to Me today. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, Amy, welcome. So let's start at the beginning. What is type 1 diabetes?
Sure. Type 1 diabetes, well, it is thought that type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease where your immune system attacks the beta cells in your pancreas so they no longer produce insulin. We still don't know a lot about type 1 diabetes, even though it's been around for a long time. Obviously, we don't know if something goes wrong in your pancreas, so that triggers the immune system, or something goes wrong in your immune system, which then just attacks the cells in your pancreas. We're still trying to get to those answers, but the difference between type 1 diabetes and type 2 is that type 1 is considered an autoimmune disease.
So to our listening audience, here we go again with another autoimmune disease. Amy, this comes up all the time. And for some reason, we don't understand, but the body attacks itself. And so that is true with type 1 diabetes, as well as the other condition that your son has, which is celiac. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. Celiac is also an autoimmune disease. Yeah.
And these tend to be, they tend to run in families. So our audience is certainly very aware of these illnesses that we discussed. So Amy, can you tell me about your son, Andrew? When was he diagnosed with type 1 juvenile diabetes, and what led to that diagnosis?
Sure. So Andy was 5 years old when he was diagnosed. Five, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a few months into COVID, so it was 2020.
Oh my.
Right. We don't know if he was exposed to COVID and if that is a trigger for the disease. There are a lot of people who are thinking that COVID is a trigger for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. There's been articles about that. But this was before there was any COVID tests, so we didn't know. We do know that there was a family in his class who did have COVID very early in February of 2020. But it probably did start before that, but we don't know. But what happened was Andy started to wet his bed again. He was 5, he was fully potty trained. We hadn't had any of those issues. But he was extremely thirsty. He was drinking a lot. and he started every once in a while having accidents. So we took him to the pediatrician in June we took him with his older brother who was having his 8-year checkup, whose birthday is in June. And we just asked the doctor to, just check it out. We said Andy started wetting his bed occasionally and drinking a lot. That was on a Friday morning. We were in the hospital that night, and our lives have never been the same since.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my God.
Oh, that just sends chills down my back.
Yep.
I am so sorry.
Yeah.
Boy,
Absolutely.
boy, you sure didn't expect that.
Nope. It changed our lives forever, and changed Andy's life. My life I could deal with. His life I have a harder time accepting.
So it really didn't take any time to make this diagnosis from what you're saying.
Nope. You can, they tested they did a P test on his, they collected his urine. They looked at the sugar in his urine. His blood sugar was over 200.
Oh my.
And there's really no other, and we were lucky. We caught it relatively early. Honestly, if Jason wasn't having that checkup that day, we probably would have waited a couple more months to take him to the doctor, and it could have been a lot more serious. He could have been in, diabetic ketoacidosis shock and, had irreversible organ damage. We were lucky that we caught it when we did. But, our pediatrician called us and he's like, I really, looked to see if there was any other explanation for this, and there isn't. And yeah, we were in the hospital that night getting training on how to give him insulin injections.
Wow.
Is this a typical presentation for juvenile diabetes?
Typically, yes. You get when your blood sugar is high, you get thirsty, and and most people actually lose weight. Andy did lose a few pounds, but if you get it sort of older, you can lose a lot more weight. It's basically like, think of it as like the keto diet on steroids, because so it's weight loss, it's extreme dehydration and thirst that are the traditional symptoms.
Wow.
But it was summertime and it was super hot, and so we thought he was just drinking a lot and because he was running around. So.
Now, was it all your pediatrician that helped you in this journey, or were there other doctors you then went to? How did it work?
So when you're diagnosed with type 1, so we first, our pediatrician sent us to Children's Hospital. We went to Children's, we did the diabetes training of how to basically try to take care of Andy. And now he has an endocrinologist for his diabetes. Interestingly, type 1 is treated by endocrinologists typically, but we don't have an immunologist, which you would typically go to for an autoimmune disease. And I think one of the issues with type 1 and sort of the treatment options, which are getting much better. And, I know a lot of people who've been in the type 1 world longer than I have been, and they say, you have no idea how good you have it. We have a lot of tools now to manage the disease. I still think it's terrible. And I keep telling them it's still not good enough and we have to do more. But one of the issues is that, most endocrinologists treat people with type 2 as the predominant part of their practice, because there's so many more people with type 2 than with type 1. So, that's who we go to for Andy's treatment. We love our endocrinologist. He's fantastic. But I do think, there being a class of disease that has a much bigger prevalence for another type of disease sort of makes it somewhat harder to find great treatment across the country.
Like the stepchild.
Yeah, exactly. Like the stepchild. That's a better said than I did.
Word.
Yes.
Well, how did Andy's and which of the healthcare providers explain the condition to you at that time and your husband? And then how did you explain the diagnosis to Andy and to his big brother?
so many times, so many different ways. One of the sneaky things about type 1 is it depending on your age, the people who are, again, half the people diagnosed with type 1 are over the age of 18. So it used to be called juvenile diabetes because it was the only type of diabetes that kids get, for the most part. But then they learned that adults can get type 1, and the prevalence of type 1 is increasing, which people don't really understand why. But what happens with type 1 is, and the older you are, the longer you last, is you're sort of in a honeymoon period. So all the cells in your pancreas don't die, in one day, but they increasingly die over time. So when Andy was first diagnosed, he didn't need that much insulin when he ate. His ratio, this is how it was, he needed 1 unit of insulin for every 50 carbs. Now he needs 1 unit of insulin for like every 10 carbs. Sort of in the morning, it's 1 for 8 carbs, 1 for 12 carbs. So you sort of, when he was first diagnosed, I really didn't even understand. It took me a long time to understand how tough this disease is to manage properly. Because again, he was still making some insulin on his own, and he wasn't, having very low blood sugars because he was using so little insulin and things like that. But the problem with diabetes is if you have high blood sugar over long periods of time, it obviously damages your organs. The healthy life degradation is still 32 years for an average person with type 1 diabetes who's diagnosed at the age of 10. So Andy was diagnosed at the age of 5, and we have to try to keep his blood sugar, in range or, not high. And we have to do that completely with exogenous insulin, which means we have to give him a shot sort of basically every time he eats. And different food breaks down in your body differently. So we're sort of constantly trying to get this formula right. And if you have too much insulin, if you sort of overdose, your blood sugar drops to a point where you could die. So you're constantly trying to get this equation right. But you basically, depending on, the younger you are, the shorter your honeymoon period is, that they call it. The older you are, the longer, and which in some ways means the older you are, the longer it takes to get diagnosed, because your blood sugar just goes up sort of more gradually, but stays up for an extended period of time. So it's still a very, very tough disease to manage. We have now insulin pumps, which Andy's finally wearing. It took us basically 2 years to get him to agree to wear the pump.
Well, how did he do with the shots after every?
He didn't mind the shots, actually. After a while, he just would, come up to us and, give us his arm or his tush and say, like, I want to eat something, give me a shot, so.
Wow. Yeah.
But you kind of always have to be there for him.
Right.
And, not everybody feels comfortable giving him a shot. So, play dates were hard, and doing anything, outside the home was tricky.
Really difficult. Yeah.
Right. But now he wears a pump, and he has a constant glucose monitor that measures his glucose, 24/7, basically. So we constantly get readings of whether he's high or he's going low, and alarms and alerts, that goes off all hours of the day and night.
Wow. Now, is type 1 diabetes inherited? Will genetic testing or counseling flag it as a potential issue?
That's a great question, and a really, really important one. 85% of people who have type 1 do not have a family member who has type 1. So, mean, I have thyroid issues. My husband has Crohn's, so we have autoimmune diseases in our family. But people, there are a lot of kids whose siblings have type 1 or whose parents have type 1. It's becoming more prevalent in families. Since it is an autoimmune disease, there are tests for it. You can test if you have autoantibodies for type 1. And I think everybody should do that. You know, when you take your kids to a pediatrician office, just ask them to test. There are four autoantibodies. And the reason to test is because the first treatment to prevent type 1 was introduced to the market last year. Now, it won't Andy, but it will help other kids if they have autoantibodies before they sort of lose their beta cells. There's a treatment now that can, at least on average, has forestalled it for 3 years. And they don't know if they could then try it again to forestall it. But they are, it's a really novel approach, and, you know, very exciting for people in the community that there now is at least one drug that, and it's a treatment, it's in the hospital for 14 days and an intravenous treatment, but still not having type 1 for 3 years is worth it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. What a blessing. That's really wonderful. So we've been talking about type 1 diabetes. Amy, can you just delineate the difference between type 1 and adult diabetes, just so we're clear about the difference?
Right. Well, so as I said, type 1 is an autoimmune disease. Type 2 is not, and that's what most people refer to as adult diabetes. But unfortunately, type 2 is now, we're seeing it in kids younger as well. But type 2, and I don't know that much about type 2, is not considered an autoimmune disease. And it's just considered that the ability of your pancreas to make enough insulin, it goes down, and so you have high blood sugar. But it's not, and there are some people with type 2 who need exogenous insulin, but a lot of people with type 2 are trying to control the disease without, just with diet and exercise and sort of lifestyle changes.
I was going to ask, is type 1 then more connected to genes and genetic issues?
I think so, but I'm not sure, because I don't know enough about type 2 to make that connection. But type 1 is definitely, you know, has its roots in your genes. It's an it's considered an autoimmune disease.
Yeah. So the type 2 would be a lifestyle change where you might cut out sugars, such as drinking and certain foods, as a way to control the type 2 before having to take insulin. I can just hear a doctor giving a lecture. If you don't start getting on the straight and narrow, you're going to be taking insulin. That would be the conversation in the doctor's office. What your son has is a totally different kettle of worms.
Totally different.
Yes.
Right. And what's somewhat frustrating is that there are endocrinologists that the people who are not managing their type 1 particularly well, there is a little bit of shaming the patient of like, well, if you were just more careful, and if you were just more, and it's really, really hard to manage type 1 well. Like, you just, you know, he's not making any of his own insulin at this point, probably. And everything that he eats, you know, sort of digests differently depending on the day. And there's been all these studies about, you know, the amount of insulin that the average person needs to get to, you know, 110 blood sugar before bed, like, varies by 300% a day. It's sort of like, if you're sick, your blood, you know, it changes. If you're stressed, you know, his blood sugar changes. It's just it's a constant management issue.
Wow, that's huge. Now, I'm wondering, besides the celiac, which we'll get to shortly, are there dietary restrictions with type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So you don't want, you know, he really can't have, on an average day, if his blood sugar is not low, he really can't have juice or anything that really will spike your blood sugar really quickly.
Okay.
But if his blood sugar is low, he needs those things. So it's a very, you know, so if his blood sugar, so if he does a lot of exercise, you know, his blood sugar will drop. And again, as I said, if your blood sugar gets too low, that's very dangerous, like immediately dangerous. So I always have a thing of juice with me in case, you know, something happens and his blood sugar drops and I need to get it up a little bit. But on an average day, you know, with a meal, I would never give him, you know, juice or soda or anything that would make his blood sugar spike. You know, so we do try to eat a lot of vegetables, a lot of protein. We try to eat that first, because then that sort of slows down the absorption. The problem with exogenous insulin is it takes about 25 minutes or even longer to sort of really work. So you have to sort of try to pre-dose him and give him the insulin before he eats, and then, you know, hope that it sort of, the insulin in his body sort of is working when the food is being digested.
You're becoming a scientist.
It is, yeah.
It is.
Like, and there's different amounts of fat in food, and so, you know, and that changes how fast it breaks down. So, you know, I was talking to one other mother who said, you know, she started to hate food because it just what it did to her daughter. And, you know, and I have a very strange relationship with food now. There are things that I used to love that we just I don't even bring into the house or eat anymore. Yeah.
Wow.
You know, it's very interesting, Amy, when my son was going to become a bar mitzvah. So to our audience, this is a ritual that takes place in the Jewish tradition. When a boy is 13 or when a girl is 13, then it's called a bat mitzvah. And I received a call from a mother in the class who was a mother of a girl. So because my son hung out with the boys, I didn't know the mother of the girls and didn't know. And the mother called me and told me that her daughter had juvenile diabetes and asked me a number of questions. We were going to go from the temple service to a venue for a party. And first question she asked me was, where would the bathroom be in relation to the room? So I learned that she at 13 would have to do maybe a test to see where her sugar was. The second question was, what time was I serving dinner and what was I going to serve? And so we went through the menu. And when I tell you, when I planned this party, the thought never occurred to me. It never occurred to me that I had to be careful about children and sugar. But I can tell you that I couldn't have been more accommodating in that I said, would you like me to take something out or add something to this menu? And she said, no, because what I'm going to do, there are things in this menu that are perfectly fine. I want to help my daughter make good choices. Right. And as it was, I also said to add another wrinkle, it's going to be a buffet. So I said, I will make sure she is first in line. But this sort of conversation, this management of this disease is very important. But I have to say, I would think that anyone would be accommodating to, you know, a child that needs this special help. You know, if you ask, certainly everyone would want to make sure that a child is healthy, and you know, because a mistake can be really catastrophic, could land you in the hospital, and you don't want that. So
most people are very accommodating. I can tell you terrible stories of parents who are not accommodative.
Really? Oh no.
Yeah, which is very. You know,
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, we last year on Valentine's Day, this was so terrible. There was the class mom of Andy's class who had only had 10 kids, and he was the only kid with a food allergy or issue. And they were going to have a waffle bar that wasn't gluten-free waffles, so he wouldn't be able to participate. And when I said to the mom, like, you know, he's not going to be able to, she's like, well, he can eat a bowl of whipped cream. I was like, he also has diabetes. He cannot eat a bowl of whipped cream. But it became this like fight with the school, and, you know, and so I do think most parents are very, very accommodative. Yes. But there are the ones that are not too. Yeah.
You know, I also was going to say, now your son has also been diagnosed with celiac disease. Yes. And as a child, for some reason, our pediatrician decided that my siblings and I all had celiac disease. I don't know why. To this day, none of us had celiac, but for a period of time, when we went to a birthday party, we could not have the cake. We were the first kids to have rice cakes.
Mhm.
So for anyone in our listening audience, those rice cakes that taste like styrofoam, that's what I grew up on. I don't know if Andy has that. This is a regular diet, but
We have
things
a
have
lot of
gotten a
rice.
lot better. But so Andy also has celiac, which we also discussed was an autoimmune disease. And how does that play in with his diabetes?
And how did you suspect that?
So it's not uncommon for the two to go together. About 25 to 30% of people with type 1 also have celiac.
So you were looking for that, I would imagine.
We were, yeah.
Then.
So a simple blood test, we weren't surprised by that. I will say, Andy, but prior to being diagnosed with celiac, we thought he potentially had like ADHD or some sort of attention disorder. And it turned out once we took gluten out of his diet, his ability to sit and focus.
Oh, for goodness sake.
So much better.
Oh my goodness.
So it's very, again, celiac is pretty simple. I mean, to definitively define celiac, I think you need a scope, but you could do a blood test and you can get a pretty good idea. Again, and it's a really cheap test. I think, if for parents out there, just ask your pediatrician to do it.
Were there symptoms that, raised your suspicion so you'd know to ask the doctor?
So there's a number of people that I know whose kids, it presents as ADHD in many ways because you're uncomfortable. And so you're constantly moving and squirming. And you don't know you're uncomfortable because this is just how you think
you're a child.
Feel.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Now, so Andy never had any symptoms of celiac. His growth was fine. Some people, it impacts you as you don't grow and you don't develop, on time, but Andy didn't have that. But now once we took gluten out of his diet, now if he has anything with gluten, he will throw up.
Oh no.
Profusely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, so we will know if there's a mistake made at a restaurant, an hour and a half later.
Oh my God.
We've had that. But if you asked him which disease he would prefer not to have, he would probably say celiac because of the lunchroom and the birthday parties, which he can't have the cake or the pizza.
No cake or the pizza. Yeah.
Even though diabetes is a much more serious disease from long-term implications.
Right.
But of course, today, if you go to a restaurant, you can get gluten-free pasta. I see it in restaurants now.
Yes.
We have gotten much better.
It's much better, although I will say we go to nicer restaurants than we probably would have before, because if you look at a traditional kids menu, the chicken fingers, most of the French fries are in a fryer that also does other things that have breadcrumbs in it. So we can't even.
So it's not clean. Yeah.
It's not right. So there's cross-contamination.
Yeah.
My husband, and I have this, we went to Japan for vacation a couple years ago because he can eat rice and and I could bring my own soy sauce. Yeah, I could bring my own soy sauce because soy sauce has gluten in it. So we could, we're very fortunate that we could sort of work around this better than most, but a lot of the kids' foods and a lot of the desserts on traditional menus it's hard.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, Amy, have you modified your home to accommodate Andy and his daily needs at all?
So we don't have any gluten in our house ever, which is a big issue for my older son, who only wants to eat wheat and pasta, of course. We also, the diabetes, has a lot. I have a cabinet in my dining room that just has insulin pumps and finger pricking test material, that has all the stuff that we need. Ketone strips to see if his blood sugar is high. There's just a lot of stuff to manage. Also, Andy, at the age of 9 now, but for many years has had a phone because his phone is his constant glucose monitor.
Yeah.
sensor. So, my younger son has a phone where my 12-year-old son still doesn't have a phone.
Oh boy.
Does
there's
he know what the numbers mean? I mean, is he um, have enough understanding to know, Mom, there's a problem here or something like that?
for the most part, he does. I will say he's a 9-year-old boy, so he doesn't look at it all the time, but he does have to wear it constantly. So he's a fanny pack with his phone and his pump around his body, at all times. Um, but he does know, and fortunately, he knows when he's going low. He feels it more often than not. But there are some diabetics who don't feel it, and that's very dangerous because once if you go too low, your brain doesn't function well, and so you
Right.
can't treat yourself, which is, take sugar or juice or something like that. And again, that's unfortunately, most people don't realize this, but there are people who die from type 1 diabetes relatively regularly because they go low, and they don't have blood sugar going to their brain, and you have a stroke and you die. So it's
Mm.
he does he monitors it as best he can, I think, given his age. But that's part of what we have to teach him. And
Wow.
again, like if he's really playing outside and having a great time and his alarm's going off, he might not even notice because it goes off all the time. It goes off daily, either high or low. So it's just it's
It's
it's just hard for a kid.
for
They
a
say at
child,
13,
a
14.
kid.
I think girls can do it a little bit earlier, but for boys, they say at 13, 14, that's when they really start to take it on their own.
Other than the waffle bar,
Right.
how's his life at school and with friends? Can they help him navigate all of his daily life and medical needs? Or is it, is any of it, is there any semblance of Beth's story about when the mother called
Oh,
for?
sure. Most parents, he went to a birthday party this weekend and the mom stopped by and picked up a gluten-free pop, cake pop for him so he could have it at the birthday party. Most people are very, very accommodative and really want to try to help. And now we just found a wonderful babysitter who also has type 1 that, we
Oh my
feel like
goodness.
we can
Wow.
leave the kids alone, because for a while it was, nobody really wanted to dose him. They were scared because
Sure.
if you give too much insulin, it can be dangerous. So as he gets older, and he did go to a camp just for kids with type 1, we tried to send him to a camp that was, that didn't focus on type 1, and that was really hard. And my husband actually ended up having to stay at the camp all summer, a sleepaway camp. Because the nursing staff couldn't handle it. But last year he went to a camp for kids with type 1, which was wonderful. And, everybody there had type 1. It was a sleepaway camp. And, he saw older kids with it and managing it themselves. And I think he got more interested in trying
Did he like that camp?
He loved it. He's a camper
isn't
through
that
and through.
great?
Yeah.
That just
Right.
fills my heart with joy.
Yeah,
That is
so I mean, and it's a
wonderful.
wonderful organization. It's called Camp Sweeney. If anybody has a child with type 1 who's listening to this, I highly, highly recommend the
Well,
camp.
how
They
about
have
we will put
financial
for our
aid if you need
audience,
it.
we will put the link to this camp in
Yeah.
the
Yes.
show notes. I think
That would
that's
be
very
wonderful. It's a
Yes.
really wonderful organization, and it doesn't overly focus on type 1. It's just a place for kids that they can be kids and have the camp experience. And there is financial aid there if anybody needs it.
Your job is really twofold. One, you are taking care of a little boy,
Right.
but two, Amy, you're having to, what all parents do is we want our children to grow up and be independent,
Right.
but you're going to have to train him to learn how to take care of himself. So another antidote, I have a good friend whose granddaughter also has type 1 diabetes. She's now in college.
Yeah.
And we have talked about her choices being in the college setting. And You have to have enough confidence to be able to say to your friends, gee, instead of going out for pizza, can we change to sushi?
Yeah.
We just want to be together. Can we change the venue? Because it's not going to be safe. Because if I have that pizza, I'm going to get really sick.
Right.
And this is sort of when children don't have the self-confidence to maybe confide in their friends. So you're teaching now how he takes care of himself. And this is going to be so all important for his future.
Yeah.
And how
college scares the hell out of me, honestly.
Yes.
The drinking.
Well, the drinking is, I was going to get to that. That's another big part. And thankfully, I think drinking, not everybody is a big drinker anymore.
Yeah.
So that he can find, hopefully, a group that is, maybe he'll be playing one of his athletic sports, and those kids will be more focused on the sport and maybe going for a jog rather than the beer jugging or the beer game or whatever.
Right. Well, the
celiac,
the beer's off the table.
The beers, but he can't drink anyway. But that's what I'm saying.
But it's very scary because alcohol impacts your blood sugar. Like you think it would make your blood sugar go up, but it makes it go down. No. It's very, very dangerous. So, I'm.
But I think that there may be options, let's go play tennis. Let's go for a jog. Let's go for a swim. Let's do other activities to engage in a social activity that will be safe for him. Yeah. So, the other question I was going to ask you, when you have a child that has a certain condition that requires a lot of attention, how does that impact the family? And you have another son. Yeah. So that dynamic, there already, as you said, certain foods that are not allowed in the house. How does that interact the family dynamic? And does he understand what his brother is going through?
I think he does. My other son has a very big fear of shots. So I think he's oh
my goodness.
I know he doesn't even like watching Andy get a shot or So, but it is hard. Andy gets a lot more attention, like medical attention. My other son gets plenty of attention. Like
there's only so much time in the day, Amy.
Exactly. And he's a wonderful kid, and we love him with all of our heart. I think, but it is hard. It is hard to balance it. And I do think on occasion there's like when he gets hurt, he wants a lot of sympathy because, again, I think maybe to compensate a little bit. But, I don't know. I think it impacts everybody. It does. It impacts the whole house. And, there are plenty of times that Andy, hates his diabetes and, he'll ask me at night before bed, Mom, when is it going to go away? When is it going to be cured? How much longer will I have this? It's
what do you say?
Oh, that breaks my heart.
It breaks my heart too.
Are you honest?
Working as hard as we can, to cure it. And as Kathy mentioned, on the board of the T1D fund, which is a venture fund started by 100 families in the US that's solely focused on finding a cure for type 1 and investing in companies that will do that. There's a lot of breakthroughs recently in autoimmune disease that we hold out some hope for, not tomorrow, but in years to come. But it impacts the whole family. Every meal is, you have to think about what you're serving, how many carbs there are. Is he going to want seconds? Every trip we take, we have to make sure that we're going to places that have good medical care, medical care in case, God forbid, something happens. That we can get backup pumps and CGMs. Like anytime we travel, we have a whole suitcase full of, things that we need to manage this disease. So it's, as I said, it sort of sneaks up on you because it doesn't start out quite as bad as it gets over time because, typically it's diagnosed, you're still in, they call it stage 3 of type 1. And stage 4 is when you don't, you're fully on exogenous insulin and you're not making any insulin on your own.
Wow. Now,
Amy, when my daughter had a condition as a child, and we would have similar conversations, and I used to say to her, all your friends are going to have something. It's just, you're something before they do.
absolutely.
And so that you're not odd. As a matter of fact, you're going to learn how to take care of yourself, because when they get their condition, it's going to be a total shock.
Right.
So, and the two of us are going to work together to help you deal with this condition. So, boy, is he lucky to have you as a parent, both you and your husband, I think, because he's got a really good start in life in taking care of a very challenging disease. And yet he's going to be very healthy. I commend you,
I think
Amy.
he will be. I will say he is very conscious of what he eats, much more than the average 9-year-old. He knows what's in the food. Halloween used to be our favorite holiday. Now then it went to be our least favorite holiday.
Of course, yes.
But now he's getting better, and he has one piece of candy a day. We just don't have a lot of sugar. We go to, instead of going out for ice cream, we go to the bookstore.
So as he's grown up, he's learning how to strategize.
Yes.
It sounds like, and meet his daily challenges, and he just seems to be growing so well. I think you've really educated him so well.
So yeah, he's a resilient kid. He has
really,
to be. Yeah.
He's really adapting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wow, Amy, you're just incredible. And in closing, what advice would you have for our listeners about both type 1 diabetes and or celiac disease?
It's just everybody just has to get through the day as best that they can. It's a really, really challenging disease. Both of them are really challenging. Celiac, I think, is in my opinion, a little bit more manageable. Although I will say, if he asked which one he would prefer not to have, he would say celiac. But I feel like if you just have celiac, you can sort of compensate. I was talking to one mom who's like, we would go to a birthday party and I would bring a chocolate bar for after the birthday party because I knew they wouldn't have cake, and you could have 2 chocolate bars. Like, if you have both, you can't do that. You can't do that with the diabetic. So,
No.
Everybody has good days and bad days. It used to be, when I went to sleep at night, I would, like, my day would be how my portfolio did for work. And then it became how Andy's blood sugar was that day. And I would judge myself if he had a bad day, and that gets really hard. And then, when my husband and I would fight about why he had a bad day or why his blood sugar was high, and then all I would say is give yourself a break and do the best that you can, because it's a marathon, and each day is something different. And, and reach out to Breakthrough T1D or the T1D Fund. There are good resources. There are a lot of people in our boat, even if it doesn't feel that way often.
Well, I'd like to also to tell our listeners that we will post the link to both the camp and to the T1D Fund within our show notes. So those resources will be available. I think that's important. But thank you so much, Amy, for sharing both your story and your journey and your sons. I mean, both have been so inspirational. And the way both of you have, your whole family has navigated T1D and celiac together at every meal, as you're saying, every vacation, every time you wake up in the morning. It's
that's the first thing I look at is what his blood sugar is.
Well, we hope our listeners have learned as much as we have today and felt as inspired as we do. Thank you for coming on. It happened to me. And again, to our listeners, We'll post the resources in the show notes. Very important. Thank you, Amy, so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of It Happened to Me. We encourage you to learn more at ithappenedtomepod.com. Please use the contact form on our website to submit your guest suggestions, comments, questions, ideas, and feedback for the show. You can also email us directly at ithappenedtomepod@gmail.com. We would really appreciate it if you can leave us a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app like Apple or Spotify. This helps others in the rare disease and medical challenge community find us. It Happened to Me is created and hosted by Kathy Gillenhorn and Beth Glassman. I'm Keir Deneen from DNA Today, and I serve as our executive producer and marketing lead. Amanda Andrioli is our associate producer. Ashlyn Anokian is our graphic designer. And remember, it happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.